one of the most important aspects of what innovation is driving right now is big gains in how we make decisions. Recent Gartner research has shown that supply chain decisions have become 71% more complex, 52% more frequent, and they need to be made 57% faster. And decision-making, timely, confident, accurate, better and better decision-making is a core function of supply chain management, right? When I think of innovation, I think of the gains we're making in enabling our team to make better decisions. I think of the gains we've made in visibility. And I would argue, Glenn, you might agree, you might disagree, visibility across the ecosystem, products, trade partners, suppliers, it's not good enough. We need solutions and answers.
Welcome to Parcel Perspectives, the podcast dedicated to small parcel shippers. I'm Glenn Gooding, and each episode, we dive into insights, best practices, and strategies to help you navigate this complex, costly market. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. I'm Glenn Gooding, your host, and today we're diving deep into the world of supply chain management with a very special guest, Scott Luton. Scott is not only a leader in the supply chain arena, but also the CEO and founder of Supply Chain Now, a platform dedicated to enhancing supply chain education and sharing industry best practices. We're going to throw some big words at you guys today. Today, we're going to be discussing the power of innovation leadership and the impact of strategic foresight on supply chain operations. My goodness, that could be a 36-hour podcast in itself, but we're going to try to unpack to the best of our ability, here are some of the elements that transform operations to be more efficient, adaptable, and sustainable. Scott, it's truly a pleasure to have you on with me. Let's get started.
Hey, Glenn, sounds great. I appreciate those kind words, and I'll try to live up to them. But great to finally meet you in person.
Couldn't agree more. Pleasure to meet you in person. Look forward to getting together over a sweet tea and a barbecue sometime soon.
Okay, sounds great.
So, Scott, if you don't mind, you mind just sharing a little bit about your background and kind of what led you to found Supply Chain Now?
I'd love to. It's one of my favorite parts. We love talking and thinking and reflecting back on our journeys. So I spent over 20 years in end-to-end supply chain in a wide variety of roles. Worked a good bit in the manufacturing industry, which is one of my loves as I came to find out. Metal stamping, construction products, and a whole bunch more. Been in and out of over 300 plants and sites, where my favorite thing to do, Glenn, is to spend time with the wonderful people on the front lines and learn from their experiences. From automotive plants to e-commerce fulfillment centers to steel foundries, which can be a little bit intimidating, to
yes,
returns.
They can be, can't they?
Oh, goodness. Returns processing centers, which are have grown in importance for sure, to the incredible ports that keep global trade moving, which is fascinating. And then kind of on the other side, I've really been fortunate to have facilitated tons of in-person learning and networking events over the years. Really enjoy those powerful knowledge exchanges and those opportunities to build relationships, which we know the value of those, right? Now, to the impetus or the beginnings of Supply Chain Now, about 11, maybe 12 years ago, I had this eureka moment. Hey, all that stuff we've been doing, going out and seeing and talking and learning and networking and sharing, why don't we try to replicate this digitally? So a few years later, those early and regular experiences grew into webinars and podcasts and the like, and Supply Chain Now was born. And the mission, while the look and the feel and what we do and how we deliver on the mission has evolved and changed like most businesses, the mission itself hasn't. Connecting people with new ideas, proven best practices, intriguing leaders and their stories, benchmarking opportunities, market intel gathering, exchanging, and of course, building relationships, which indeed matter.
Couldn't agree more. I love the relationship aspect. Love it, love it, love it. And you and I, we've been the benefactor of like the last 5-6 years of that black swan event called COVID, where we went from nobody knowing what supply chain was to everybody being interested to some degree, right?
You're absolutely right. And you're reading my mind. I'd argue, and you might agree with me, it sounds like with what you just said there, that the supply chain world has largely been invisible to your average consumer for maybe not all of human history, but close to it.
Yeah.
I think of my granddad, Dick Rutland, retired as a machine operator at a Kimberly-Clark plant way back in the day. And to this day, I regret I never sat down and spoke to him about what he did. We spoke about plenty of other things, including infamous bluebird couple in his backyard that couldn't quite agree on where to build their next nest. He was a big bird nerd like I am.
Yeah.
But I wish I was more curious about what he did for a living. But all that as it may, we have kind of broken through to some degree the awareness challenge, right? And that's a good thing because we're all touched. If you're practitioners, if you're consumers, because we're all consumers, we all benefit every single day by what the good people in global supply chain do, right? And I think that's one of the silver linings that the pandemic delivered to us all, heightened awareness. But awareness is important, but education is equally as important, right? And I don't know about you, Glenn, as we're having conversations and connecting with folks all across really business, including global supply chain, folks that have just come in the industry or folks that have been in the industry for a long time. They're trying to catch up with what's new. They're all searching for solutions and ideas and challenges and what other leading organizations or other sector players, what they're doing to overcome old and new challenges. And that education piece, that keeping up with the times and keeping up with the velocity that not just supply chain is operating at, but business, well, that's been an important part. And then one last thing, Glenn. We talked about awareness here. We talked about education. But amongst all those folks that tune in or we talk to or we meet out at these plants and sites and these conversations, these practitioners like my granddad, Dick Rutland, they have fascinating stories to tell. And I love putting the microphone in front of them to get them out, All of it's rocket fuel.
For sure. Kind of like the Mike Rowe of supply chain dirty jobs, right?
Yeah. You like Mike Rowe. He needs to get more airtime. He's got a lot already. I wish more folks were introduced to his way of thinking, huh?
I couldn't agree more. Love the guy. Great voice, great orator. Just another guy I'd love to sit down over a sweet tea with, I think.
Really quick. This might make your day much better than anything I'll ever share with you. I had an opportunity to spend about an hour remotely interviewing Mike Rowe. And he is the same individual behind the scenes, behind the TV, behind the camera, whatever you want to say, as he is out in front. Genuine and engaging. He doesn't care if you're the mayor or, the machine operator or some lowly podcast host. He loves to meet and talk with people. And that authenticity, that is a breath of fresh air.
Man, I get drawn to people like that. It's encouraging to hear that. So, supply chain, you threw a lot out there. It was great. One thing I've concluded, a couple absolutes in the supply chain world. One, supply chain seems to never get cheaper. And it seems to never get simpler, right? So I would say the supply chain we live in today is more expensive and more complex than it's ever been, right? And so when you talk about education, I think it's more critical now than it's ever been. Wouldn't you agree?
I do agree. With a twist. I like how you put it. It never gets cheaper. It never gets simpler. However, on that latter, I think supply chain leaders, especially the best ones, can find ways of making certain, maybe not end to end, but certain components, certain processes, certain tasks within day-to-day operations and making those simpler for their people. It's immensely challenging. It's not simple to make things simpler. And everyone can't do it because, like you said, I agree with you. The normal trend is things get tougher and things get more expensive. But man, those leaders that can make that happen, they're special.
Yeah, it's perfect. I threw the ball over the rim and you threw it down for me. Great segue into this. So when you think of that visionary leadership, big words, they can mean a lot out there. What does it mean to you in relationship to supply chains and the future of supply chains?
That is a big word. And vision and visionary probably means lots of things to lots of different people. But what I think of are the qualities, and especially the key qualities that define a successful and visionary supply chain leader. And if I had a short list, I'm thinking of constantly learning, right? Just because you earn a title doesn't mean you've hit the finish line.
Amen.
Highly, highly empathetic, right? That's one of my favorite leaders I've ever worked for. Managers, leaders, no matter. It's those folks that never sleep on their empathy, expectant of change, and they lean into it, right? Because the people that work for them and are on their teams, they're constantly looking up to leaders and how they react to change. They can't act like their hair's on fire.
Yep.
Tireless experimentation, that's so critical, especially here in the modern era, I'll call it. Storytelling and kind of its cousin, influencing. Storytelling in particular, I think it's got such a place. And sometimes we're like, well, hey, I'm a production manager. What the heck do I have to worry about storytelling? If you want to convince people of how to lean into change, you got to tell a great story, including answering the question, the WIFM, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
And then finally, kind of in my view, when you think of the supply chain ecosystem and you think of all the divides that humans and organizations and entities within the ecosystem will build up, the barriers, I think great visionary leaders find a way to be effective bridge builders. And the good Lord knows we need more powerful bridge builders in today's very frictious society.
I love what you're saying. I want to unpack it a bit with you. What I see so often in the supply chain world, you probably bump into it as well. So many folks out there racing to the bottom. Cheap, 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 cheap. Benchmark, drive down supply cost, vendor cost, this and that. Seems to be short-sighted, don't you think?
I think one of the many, many lessons that the pandemic painfully in so many ways taught us, I'm hoping lots of those lessons stick around for a very long time. Unfortunately, I'm already seeing some organizations and some leaders, unfortunately, that have forgotten some of those lessons we just learned in very tangible ways just a couple of years ago. But to your point, cheap is not best, right? You get what you pay for. All those old cliches, moving everything offshore and losing visibility and not being able to really trust the products and what's gone into them or how they've been made. It's come to back to bite the industry in so many different ways. And, when you sign up, everybody wants to save $1, right? But you got to do it in the right places, the right ways, because if you do it the wrong way, it's going to come back and bite you in very awful ways that can cost you a whole bunch more dollars than what you saved in the first month of the initial decision.
You bet. Another word you threw out there that tickled me a little bit, or I'm curious about, is experimentation. I'm not sure that's a word you hear a lot in the supply chain world. I think we should hear more of it. How do you envision, how do you see experimentation specifically kind of in the supply chain? Maybe a story about that, or maybe an example of that from your perspective. I'd love to learn more on that.
Sure. I think we've all heard of the phrase, the pilot project, right? That's one of my favorite things, right? Especially when you bring trading partners together and you're trying to find new ways of working together. Pilots aren't always going to work, whether it's maybe shifting production from one area or maybe mapping your network a different way. And oftentimes you can do experimentation in a very low risk, if not risk-free environment, of course, using technology here in the golden age of supply chain tech. And because of our ability to do that and leverage tech in real low risk, no risk ways, I think folks like Jeff Bezos, that Amazon has built and continues to this day to benefit from immense experimentation. And I'm hoping that with the prevalence of technology that's at our fingertips in so many different ways, that supply chain leaders will embrace more and more experimentation to find new, powerful ways of doing things and powerful ways of making the days easier and more successful for their people. Because for me, it all roads lead back to how we are positioning our people for success, right? Especially in this day and age of burnout and turnover and pressure and stress.
Yeah, 100%. You're definitely a servant leader, I can tell, based off everything you're saying on that. Makes good sense. Innovation, where does that weave into this narrative and story in your mind, Scott?
Innovation.
So experimentation and kind of its sister in my mind, kind of innovation, right? You have to innovate in order to experiment, right?
Yeah. So there's so many things that can go into the word like innovation, right? So many different things.
Yep.
And I think one of the most important aspects of what innovation is driving right now is big gains in how we make decisions, right? Get this. Recent Gartner research has shown that supply chain decisions have become 71% more complex, 52% more frequent, and they need to be made 57% faster, right? And decision-making, timely, confident, accurate, better and better decision-making is a core function of supply chain management, right? So when I think of innovation, I think of the gains we're making in enabling our team to make better decisions. I think of the gains we've made in visibility. And I would argue, Glenn, you might agree, you might disagree, visibility across the ecosystem, products, trade partners, suppliers, it's not good enough. We need solutions
completely
and
agree,
answers,
Scott.
right?
Completely agree, Scott.
And I think one more thing before I think of some innovation examples that might be a little more specific. Supply chain leaders, as they strive for that innovation, because there's a plethora of technology tools, insights platforms, and a whole bunch more, right? Out there, out in the marketplace. But those successful visionary, successful supply chain leaders, they've got to be able to serve as that maestro. And they can integrate all of that, the people, the process, technology, the entities involved across the ecosystem in an imperfect but harmonious symphony across the tapestry that is the supply chain. And now, when you think of symphony, I'll let you describe. You decide maybe what the woodwinds and the brass and the strings are, but the percussion, that's got to be the steady drum beat of consumer demand. And that's what drives innovation. That's one of the biggest drivers of innovation. So ERP, so innovation that we've seen. So Glenn, I'm gonna stop there for a second. I'm about to share just a couple of examples that I've seen here very recently of supply chain innovation. But do you see that same symphony?
I do. Sometimes it's more of a hot mess than a symphony, right?
No doubt. No doubt.
You missed the kazoo section, right?
That's my section. That's about the only instrument I might have a chance at playing.
Yeah, I guess perfect world, absolutely a symphony. I think so many of the supply chain leaders that I interact with, they get so bogged down in putting out fires,
right?
Solving the latest problem, the latest crisis, right? That sometimes I think they get heavily pulled away from being able to have that higher level of thought and innovation. Is I guess what I see. So, do I agree with you? I absolutely agree with you. I think it's sometimes harder for some than others.
And Glenn, to your example, to what you just shared there, that firefighting culture. I worked for a great individual. His name was Ray Attia. He wrote a book. It's somewhere back behind me there, Run, Improve, Grow. And he identified 15, 20, 25 years ago that while we want to reward those incredible people that save the day each and every day, for the operation and the system, that's an awful thing to do. What we need to do, recognition is important, timelessly, but what we need to do is fix what is making them put on that cape and fight those fires every day so they can get past it and grow and advance and innovate.
Could not agree more. We're on the same page. Absolutely. Right.
We're going to have to get you and Ray together. I bet y'all would have fascinating conversation. But, recently, when it comes to specific examples, ERP, the world of ERP has changed dramatically, right? It's changed dramatically. Recently, as new and really innovative ERPs have been riding this golden age of supply chain tech, I've seen ERP implementations going from 9 months, painful implementations, to 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Crazy.
And you don't lose what the operation and the team and the ecosystem needs, right? Mm-hmm. Scenario planning, network modeling. And we're talking about experimentation and how to find ways of making things simpler, cheaper, mitigating the risks out there, right?
Yes.
Well, we've seen situations where companies and technology has enabled organizations do that, all immense millions of scenario planning, millions of network modeling simulations from 2 months to encapsulate all those types of scenarios to kind of fill out and vet and kind of see in that vacuum to 2 minutes. Imagine what that unlocks in organizations and teams, and no matter the size of your business, whether you're a big time global enterprise or a small family run manufacturer in North Georgia, what that can unlock and how it can protect and help you find the right path forward. And then one final example of innovation. I think this is, talk about a 36-hour podcast, Glenn. We could be here for at least 36 hours, right? Because there's innovation like at every turn.
Yep.
Some of it is kind of flash in the pan, and the good stuff is stuff that's sustainable and sticks around for a long time. And it's not all tech driven. We can't fool ourselves with that. So in that less techie, more what is old is new manner, How about ideal metric identification and how we communicate and how we can transform that? We've seen companies go into warehouse 16, 17 warehouse environments, networks, and implement the right metrics, right? And communicate them effectively so that team members can be more successful every single day. And better yet, new hires, they could be productive in hours rather than weeks because they know what success looks like and how they'll be measured and what the mission is every day. So those are three examples that are real timely and that I've been diving in here recently. Your thoughts?
For sure. The right metrics. Man, I think a lot about EOS, right? As the entrepreneurial operating system.
Right.
And
we love our acronyms, don't we, Glenn?
Yeah, we do. Well, with my UPS background, that was the world of acronyms. I could bore the world to death with acronyms, right? But EOS, if you build out the right metrics, you eliminate a ton of frustration, a ton of distraction, but you align the team. Everybody's pulling the same direction, right? It's driving the right behavior toward the right goal. But it can be a massive challenge sometimes to really get consensus or arrive at truly what the right metrics are, don't you think?
Undoubtedly. And Glenn, you being a former UPSer, I can only imagine what it's like in those really big enterprises where you might have pockets or silos. And oftentimes, from what I've seen in my career in these really big, massive organizations, you can have one leader set metrics or incentives one way here. And then in just next door or a department down, they can be set differently. And if not done transparently and in parallel, you can have two teams pulling the rope in different directions. And of course, no one wins, right? So it probably gets trickier the bigger you get, I reckon.
Yeah, it does. It does. Back in my operating days, which we're going back a few decades now, I'm dating myself, but back in those legacy UPS days, everything was about production indices, pieces per hour, stops per on-road hour, depending on the operation. And boy, that's fine and dandy. You've got to get an operation done, but started looking at some of the things that were getting, some of the balls getting dropped for the sake of this production indice. For example, great one when I was out in Seattle, okay, for the sake of production, am I going to pull a TOFC load, a trailer on freight car that's going to Jacksonville, Florida at 80% so that I can keep my production indice up and get forced into a third TOFC to Jacksonville at the cost of $3,000 versus a production indice, right?
Oh, Glenn, you just painfully reminded me why it's a whole bunch. My days are a lot easier being in front of a microphone than being at a production line or at a production meeting, and further complicated by the railroad industry. Man, the railroad industry is fascinating. It is absolutely fascinating. So we're gonna have to bring you on supply chain now. We're gonna have to dive into that past life of yours.
Oh, yeah, be happy to. I'll put all the listeners to sleep with that one, I'm sure. But
can we talk about one other thing, Glenn?
Sure.
Under this big umbrella of innovation, right?
Yes.
Sustainability, right? That's
I was going to move you that direction. Yeah.
Well, hey, you move me anytime. I talk way too much. I don't have a gift for being succinct. So you move me, move anytime. But sustainability, I think for a lot of folks can be seen as more of a burden than innovative blue ocean opportunities, meeting new demand, right? Because that demand, as we all know, North Star, right? But at the same time, demand for sustainability has been incredibly real, very palpable, and growing for years. And better yet, the willingness of customers to pay for said sustainability continues to increase. Now, some folks say, well, the survey says one thing, but when folks break out their wallet, and grabbing stuff off the shelf, there might be a little disparity, and probably so. But you can see measure after measure, that's getting closer and closer. Organizations can unlock new revenue opportunities by upping their sustainability gain, right? Sustainability SLAs can be built into RFPs these days, right?
They can.
But to truly embrace the opportunity, sustainability and a willingness to act on this evolving demand, increasing demand. It can't stay relegated to the sustainability department. It's got to permeate, from what I've seen, across the supply chain organization, so that we can make sustainability push into where all decisions can factor it in. Will all decisions break in one way, shape, or form? No, but at least we'll be conscious as we bake that into our day-to-day, hour-to-hour decision-making processes. So the good thing is, I think, other good news, because if you want to see good news, there's always good news if you go looking for it. You got to look for it hard sometimes, especially some days. Last couple of years have been tough for a lot of folks, right? But when it comes to sustainability, the good news is we're seeing it pushed further and further upstream, product design, sourcing, a whole bunch more. And I think for companies that may be listening to your podcast, or companies that may be searching for better ways, how can I make more tangible progress when it comes to sustainability? The Boston Consulting Group, another acronym, BCG, right?
Yep.
They conducted a 2024 research piece that was focused on 2,000 organizations, right? And based on their data, 2 big points here. Companies that measured all scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions comprehensively are 1.6 times more likely to experience significant decarbonization benefits. So let's measure it first. Let's measure where we are first, right? And then secondly to that, what their research showed is that companies that set validated targets for each of those 3 scopes were 1.9 times more likely to make big sustainability progress. So what's old is new again. I mean, come on, Glenn, I know in your background, setting targets, but knowing where we are and measuring the whole way along the way. I mean, isn't it funny how we can make gains almost no matter what we're going after, right? By doing some of the basics.
Oh, absolutely. And sustainability is it's a in vogue topic right now, but I think it's something that should be front of mind all the time. I would argue, if you're really looking at sustainability in a comprehensive manner, you're more than likely improving efficiency, right? You're more than likely potentially reducing expenses in other ways through sustainability practices. So broad topic in my world, sustainability, and it can be carbon offset as an example, but carbon offset could be measured as saying, well, wait a minute, why are we moving everything from the Port of Savannah into this, into 5 distribution centers when you really don't need to do that? You could do the same in 3 distribution centers. And by doing that, there's already a carbon offset because you're not moving it in other parts of the country and you're still achieving certain, so there's just so many ways to look at that, in my opinion, Scott.
Glenn, I agree with you. And, the word sustainability itself for some can be a tough word, stigmatized in some circles. But to your point that you just shared there, I would argue supply chainers, business leaders, they've been after sustainability gains all of human history, kind of using your example you just talked about. Because as we make smarter decisions, a lot of times we can make those sustainability gains. It's just these days, specifically for, how can we make the world a better place and reduce the damage that we tend to have in some way, shape, or form by not doing the more sustainable thing. I think it's easier to kind of call out and set more specific targets on what protects the environment that we all operate in. One other thing, I think, as a proud capitalist, because capitalism can, contrary to popular belief or some belief, capitalism can do powerful things, good things for the world. But companies that act on the sustainability imperative, it can lead to big time bottom line gains, top line and bottom line gains, right?
Yes.
So that's good. And one last point on the sustainability topic is the more efficiencies we gain by driving more innovation across our organizations and running a better operation, highly performing operation, the easier it is to reach bigger sustainability outcomes. And the more we can do that, it goes back to finding those top and bottom line revenue gains. So it can really, and I might be stretching here, right? It might be a bridge too far, but I see a circle. I really do. I see a circle, right? We act on those traditional management gains that you were just talking about, with the port and how we move it and stuff. And then we run a stronger organization, better, more performing organization. And then we deliberately find ways of finding better sustainable outcomes. And then it leads to more business and more profit, right? And it can be a cycle here.
Agreed. And then the North Star demand, yes, you want a phenomenal product out there. But the real hook from my perspective is when you get the consumer to feel good about buying your product, now you're onto something.
That's right.
And I think sustainability practices lend a strong hand in that front.
Excellent point. The rise of brand ambassadors, right? And all the things that go into brands these days, including one of the strongest, as we've seen here as the calendar's flipped to 2025, are those brand ambassadors that are all about more sustainable organizations. And I welcome that movement. I think it'll lead to more innovation and more change in our industry, which, change is good. It's tough, but it's good.
It is. It is. Hey, you mind if we shift a little bit, if that's all right?
Please.
I want to talk about maybe a couple bumps in the road you've experienced. I think when we think about a leader and about constantly learning, I don't know about you, but my most significant learnings have been from the painful moments, the mistakes, right? The challenges that I've had to overcome, whatever that. Wondering, what are some of the biggest challenges that you might have some experience with in managing supply chains?
Glenn, I'll tell you, we might do a little digging. We might be second cousins because I think we view the world very similarly. And I think sometimes lessons can be, some lessons can be a lot tougher to reflect on and learn from and eventually, grow from. But it's so critical. It's so critical in the path forward to reflect back. So, in all transparency, I've played all sorts of roles across end-to-end supply chain. I've never served as chief supply chain officer, and that's probably a great thing for all those organizations out there. But I've held a variety of leadership roles in end-to-end supply chain for over 20 years. And I think as I was kind of assembling my thoughts here and thinking of challenges and mistakes, one core recurring challenge that I've seen in my career that comes up time and time again, especially in supply chain, right, is it can be best illustrated by a scene in the great baseball economics movie, Moneyball. Have you seen Moneyball, Glenn?
Oh, 100% seen Moneyball. Loved it.
Okay. I've watched the movie 7 times, maybe 17. I don't know. But do you remember the scene where Billy Beane, right, the general manager of the Oakland A's, as depicted in what's based on a true story at least, he's being played by Brad Pitt. I bet that made Billy Beane's day, right? Brad Pitt's going to play in a movie. Anyway, so Billy Beane in that movie is around this table, and he's got all these experts that have been in the game of baseball for decades. 60, I bet there's, let's say all of them had 30 years of experience, some of them more. There were 8 of them in the room. We're talking almost 250 years of baseball experience. And times were changing the game of baseball, much like they are now in the game of supply chain management. And they were trying to figure out how to get better, right? What does next season look like? And so Billy Beane's listening to them all, share observations and what the team needs, this, that, and the other. But then he poses the question. He's like, what's our problem? And they all take a shot at it. He goes, nope, none of that's right. He goes, quote, the problem we're trying to solve is that there's rich teams, there's poor teams, and there's 50 feet of crap, and then there's us. And it's an unfair game, right? Now, folks, if you haven't seen the movie, go out and check it out, especially if you're a baseball fan, because there's a couple of parallels there. All organizations don't have the same thing, same resources, same leadership. And the game of supply chain management, the craft of supply chain management is also very unfair in that regard and others. But one of the biggest challenges, that's where we'll bring it back to kind of your question, is ensuring that the team and the organization, the ecosystem, knows the problem, the plan, the solution, and working in an aligned fashion to make things happen, to improve what we do, the performance day in and day out. And oftentimes that calls for silo busting on a very regular basis. And you would think that in this day and age of the golden technology revolution, that it'd be easier to bust down silos and also not enact them. But I find kind of the reverse is the true. I think it's easier these days to kind of isolate ourselves in digital silos, and that doesn't help this long recurring challenge of protecting organizational alignment. So hope that makes sense, Glenn. But I love Moneyball, and that is such a great scene in that movie.
It's a fabulous scene. It's like an iconic scene for that, for sure. Great story, and I definitely see the correlation. What about triumphs? What have you been witness to or been a part of throughout your extensive supply chain career and all the people you've touched that you'd love to share as far as a story with our listeners?
I appreciate this question. And there are a lot of different things I would love to share and people I'd love to mention and aspects. So you mentioned the EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. I think I got that right. And as an entrepreneur, I think you think back on your mistakes, and it's important to learn from those. And you think back on the successes, and it's important to learn from those. And then all those days in between, that's not quite a failure. It's not quite a success, but you got to learn a lot from those days as well. But when it comes to learning, there was one interaction earlier in my supply chain career when I was in manufacturing and feeling the pressure day in and day out. And I don't want to give away. I don't want to call anybody out, right? But it was a very powerful eureka moment. So I'll kind of protect the innocent and the guilty here, right? So tough sector, working for a privately held manufacturer, right? Tuesday morning, we had a cross-functional meeting with 12 folks or so from different departments all around the organization, right? And they were all sitting around the table, usual suspects: production, quality control, customer service, of course, supply chain, warehousing, sales, you name it, right? And we were arguing over how we had arrived at a late parts report that grew to 20 pages plus long. Despite my best efforts in that chaos, no progress got made, and by the way, folks, tons of late parts. If you're new to manufacturing or supply chain, it ain't a good thing. It ain't a good thing. So as I left that Tuesday morning fruitless, painful meeting, the president of the company pulled me aside. He said, I'll always remember this. Hey, Scott. And he was in pain. What in the world do you think is the problem here? And I thought about it for a second, and it dawned on me in that meeting, and it dawned on me in that moment I was going to let the president know what was wrong with his company, which is awful, not always a good thing to do. But nobody in that room trusted each other, and it was so evident. I wish I had a video of it back in the day. And if you want to move mountains in our industry, in global supply chain, or in any industry, no matter where you live in this beautiful world, it starts, I would argue, with building trust. One person, one department, one supplier, one customer at a time. And as we've learned painfully, again, learning from what we've experienced in recent years, trust is that powerful global currency that can change the world in so many different ways, right? But man, once you lose it, it's tough to gain, but it's far more tougher to regain once it's been lost. So that the power of trust was one of the most powerful lessons I've learned in this career that I revert back on a weekly, if not daily basis.
Again, couldn't agree more, Scott. I'm just too darn old and grouchy anymore to be in an environment where trust isn't there.
That's a blessing, Glenn. That is a blessing. And so let me flip the script back on you. Operating in a high trust environment, which clearly you do, and you value that, and as a leader, it seems you make sure it's there. How can other business leaders, what's one thing they should do to help implement more trust deliberately in their culture? What would be your advice?
Great question. Number one, you have to be authentic. And I think you have to be vulnerable. I think you have to be publicly vulnerable. It's always interesting to me when I see a leader in a room of direct reports. You learn a lot about that leader. Some leaders I've seen really want everybody to know they're the smartest person in that room.
I bet when you said that, I bet all of your listeners, instant people's faces came into their brain. I bet. I know mine. Yep. It did for me.
Without question, when that dynamic exists, trust is low. Trust is low. Those reports, man, they don't want to challenge that, right? And so you don't get innovation. You don't get good discussion, good collaboration. the leaders that really impress me are the ones that come to the realization, hey, I want to surround myself with the smartest, most capable, diverse individuals I can find. And I want to create an environment in these meetings and our working relationship where I'm encouraging them to challenge the status quo. I'm encouraging them to challenge me and my ideas. I'm encouraging them to challenge each other in a collaborative way. That's what, in my mind, really develops strong, productive trust, to grow there.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. And if business leaders took your advice, we wouldn't have 20 plus pages of late part reports that would be creating so much stress for team members. And kind of using it also as an analogy, trust between trading partners amongst the ecosystem. Some of the coolest, most forward-looking, innovative ecosystems I've seen in my lifetime are when trading partners and suppliers and customers can really open up the kimono, so to speak, and share numbers and share data and share strengths and weaknesses.
Yep.
And building that trust can unlock all kinds of new opportunities, revenue producing and otherwise. And that's not for everybody. You and I know I've worked in some old-fashioned industries where none of that happened. And that's different strokes, different folks, but the opportunities are there.
For sure. Well, Scott, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. We could easily wrap another 35 hours on this if we chose to. For our listeners, from your perspective, everything we've talked about today, are there 2 or 3 takeaways from our discussion that you think our listeners should remember in what we talked about here?
Absolutely. And I'll try not to add if I heard you right, 35 hours, I'll try not to add a 36 hour to our conversation, but there's so much, right? There's so much. That's why I love what I do, to be able to interact and learn from, and I'm sure you do too, because we do same thing, learn from all these incredible leaders and practitioners and professionals. Yep. That are really not only delivering on the world as it exists today for all of us consumers, but they're changing how business is done for tomorrow and next week and then some. So all of that, we've got lots of challenges, no shortage of challenges. It comes with the territory, and some of them are going to grow. We all know the cyber world. Bad actors have access to new innovative technologies, just like the good actors do, right? But all of that and many other challenges, sustainability or any others, it's okay. I take heart in this truth that one of my guests shared me the other day, mover and shaker out there, moving freight around the world. And he said that trade will always prevail. And I took heart in that truth, because trade is that powerful force that will help to repair and build and protect and change the beautiful and massive tapestry that I was talking about earlier that is global supply chain. So 3 things. I've referenced, about 17 times this golden age of technology. So when it comes to the continued tech explosion that we're going to continue to see, there's remarkable things here and more coming down the pipeline. Supply chain leaders, professionals, or other business leaders, we got to stay focused on what's the problem and then find the best solution working backwards. Number 2, the people is my passion. And we talked about this, Glenn, a couple of times here. I'm very, whether I like it or not, I wear my emotions on my sleeve and I try to lead with that empathy we were talking about. But for so many people across global supply chain and various sectors there within, burnout is real. And so leaders and professionals out there, it's always a good time to find new ways of taking care of your people. And then lastly, trust. Going back to trust. I think that is, I hope folks take this away. Trust is difficult to establish, as it should be, but it's infinitely more difficult to regain once it is lost. And that should help guide, that should serve as North Star as you navigate all the big and small partnerships and all partnerships in between that we all have in our own ecosystems.
Thank you. I agree. And I've really enjoyed this. As our listeners kind of embark on their learning in the supply chain, they want to take a deeper dive into best practices. What's the best way for them to find more information or connect with you and Supply Chain Now, Scott? I want to give you that opportunity to connect with them.
Glenn, I appreciate that. It'll be my most succinct answer, supplychainnow.com. And of course, obligatorily, You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And I don't know if obligatorily is a word, but I just used it.
I liked it. Worked for me. Scott, an absolute pleasure. I want to thank all our listeners for another episode of Parcel Perspectives. Glenn Gooding. I look forward to being a guest on yours at some point.
Let's do it, Glenn. Really appreciate the chat.
Boring your listeners to death at some point.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Really appreciate what you do.
Hey, take care, my friend. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to Parcel Perspectives, hosted by me, Glenn Gooding. I've been in the small parcel space for 37 years, starting with a deep and broad background working for one of the major carriers as an operator and industrial engineer, later managing pricing at the highest level for the largest, most complex shippers in the world. Since then, I've been a national thought leader and worked to help drive strategy for clients from Fortune 50 companies to startup e-commerce businesses, helping them more competitively align in this complex and expensive market. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share with friends. Join us next time for more expert advice and strategies to stay ahead of the shipping game.